Fat vegan, skinny vegan, sis boom ba. Fat vegan, skinny vegan, rah rah rah. I think I watched too many cartoons when I was little. Okay, so some vegans are fat because they still eat wheat. Now they've gotten rid of the meat and they've gotten rid of the dairy, but they're still eating a non-human grain that's full of gluten, that's clogging their digestive systems, A, and preventing them from being able to absorb nutrients well. And it is creating too many carbohydrates in their body, and thus those carbohydrates are turning into fat. Now, sure, they may be eating too much nuts and seeds, no doubt, and they may be eating too much salt, which makes you retain all that fat. But as long as they continue to eat glutinous grains like wheat, oats, rye, and barley, which are only for animals in my opinion. There's a purpose for everything, okay? But the little round grains, or non-grains actually, quinoa and amaranth are not grains, and also buckwheat are the best grains for human consumption. Now teff, the African grain, is very hot and also doesn't seem to be a really great grain for me personally, even though it is a little tiny round grain, the smallest grain in the world, teff. But millet is an awesome transition grain to get off of rice. Now rice is also a transition grain to get off of wheat. And a lot of people are eating quinoa nowadays. Hardly anybody is eating amaranth yet. Another super duper grain. Quinoa and amaranth, you can grow those out in your garden with ease, unlike many of the others that are geared more for like a flat place to grow them and having a hull that needs to be removed in order for you to eat them. The quinoa and amaranth don't have a hull, and they're not a graseous grain. They're not considered a grain. They're a member of a different plant family. These are the superfoods for brain development. Okay? Years and hundreds and thousands of years ago, when people just ate mostly fruits and vegetables, they didn't have the brain development that they do now, that was largely created, in my opinion and many others, by the consumption of grains. Now, when you're consuming a hot grain like wheat, then that grain largely needs to be neutralized by a buffer food, dairy. Wheat and dairy go together like buddies. They are buddies. Cheese and crackers and cookies and milk, etc., etc. But when you consume one of these mild grains that doesn't ferment near as much, that's another aspect of the advanced grains. They don't ferment as easily. The little non-glutinous round grains do not create fermentation and alcohol in your body. That's what you want to avoid. You see, whenever food spoils, it largely, oftentimes, like sauerkraut for instance, it will turn to alcohol. When you've got a good batch of kraut, it doesn't do that. The bad batch turns to booze. Booze is a troublemaker. My father's a freaking alcoholic. He's been off of drinking alcohol for a long time. But in any case, you want to get away from fermentation. And there are so many things in that regard that we need to do, like food combining. And I still have a lot of work in that regard. So, The moral to this video is the thing that makes a lot of vegans fat is not just their genetics or eating too much nuts and seeds, fatty nuts and seeds or avocados, or too much salt, but it's also because they're consuming too much carbohydrates, wheat. And this is where the whole carbohydrate thing comes in. And people got on this low-carb diet thing because they discovered that the carbs were making them fat. Well, it wasn't the carbs. It was the type of grain that they were consuming. I guarantee you that if you eat whole cooked millet, that you will lose weight and you won't be fat. It's also the way they're prepared, okay? So flour foods hit your bloodstream. The carbs hit your bloodstream faster. And when you eat the grain, or the non-grain, whatever it may be, as long as it's not one of the glutenous grains, if you eat that in a non-flour form, then it's not going to create the quickie carbs into your bloodstream and then create that fat. And so there is much to learn, and it's not just a matter of learning it up here. It's a matter of achieving it throughout. And it takes years and years and years to get rid of that mucoid plaque. And so you have to be patient. And this is why many vegans fall off the wagon and have to go back, because they didn't clean out that mucoid plaque in their digestive system, and so it's caked in there, and they're not absorbing nutrients near as well, and they're not consuming those nutrients in as high of a quality or as high of a quantity, because there's not near as many of the B vitamins in vegetable quality foods as there is meat. And so if you're not absorbing really well, then guess what? You're going to get deficient. And then you may have to go to a doctor, and guess what they're going to tell you? They're going to tell you that you need to go back to eating meat. But then your little voice is going to tell you, oh no, I don't want to do that. You may even say to the doctor, I don't want to do that. It may be even an ND that tells you this, or some kind of an herbalist or natural doctor, because they don't understand the cleansing process of the mucoid plaque, which is like freaking rubber. That shit is so dense in your digestive system. And it's like little carpet fibers in there. And that's all got to be cleaned out. And it doesn't happen with a 1 week cleanse or a 1 month of being vegan or even a year. The average man, like 55, 60 years old, according to the FDA, has 5 to 20 pounds of undigested food matter in their digestive system. And so you may hear stories about vegans that have been off of off of meat. They've been vegan for 5, 10 years. And then they fell off the wagon and they had to go back to eating meat because they weren't getting enough of some vitamin, usually B vitamins, something. They weren't getting enough of whatever because their digestive system was clogged full of gluten from wheat. I had to get rid of the wheat and dairy first. I went to an allergist and they told me what I was allergic to. And they told and I, from playing around, I learned that I could not eat. The things that I was most allergic to were wheat and dairy, and so I had to get rid of those first. After I got rid of the sugar and processed like white flour stuff and various preservatives. I got rid of all of that, the worst stuff first, and then I had to get rid of the wheat and dairy. And when I did that, that took me years years of enemas and cleansing and flushing out my digestive system, and